everyone. Going back over to Genesis chapter 10. Starting last week, we started to mention some of the nations that were involved in Genesis chapter 10. This is what usually they'll list calling it the table of nations, because this is where all the nations of the earth began. Now, a lot of these were listed here in Genesis that are different from the nations that we know of today, because they all descended from these particular people, and as they spread out, then sometimes nations moved, sometimes people moved, and sometimes nations divided into other nations. And so we find not an inconsistency, but a discrepancy over the passage of time in the names of a lot of these nations. Now, none of the notes that I'm going to share with you tonight are actually original on my part. I stole them from other people. But even though they are not original on my part, they agree with what I would have told you. And they were part of my resource information. And so I just, in the interest of ease, went ahead and copied out some of these notes. Some I'll read, some I'll just pass over, some I'll highlight. But here in Genesis 10, we made it as far as an overview down through verse 5. And we looked at the families of Japheth. Now, when they're listed in order as the sons of Noah, it's Shem, Ham, and Japheth. That's the birth order. And that is the order of rank according to their inheritance, their authority, and whatever, generally in the family situation, the way it was structured in early times. But he starts with Japheth instead of with Shem, and he ends up with Shem rather than Japheth. And I think we'll see some reasons why that might be the case, because usually he is going to move from one character, how do I want to put that? Not character as in person, but character as in behavior, thought, and that which describes each individual person. Okay? As I said, he didn't list them in order. Generations here in this narrative shows the narrative of the settlement of the nations existing in the time of Moses, because Moses wrote Genesis and he couldn't list a lot of the countries that we know today because they haven't been settled yet. These are all still prospective, but these are the people who settled in the areas that became the countries that we are familiar with. As of this point, there's only one family on the earth, Noah's family. Okay? And so we're looking at Noah, his sons, his grandsons, and great-grandsons. We're going to get down as far as to look at Nimrod. Nimrod's a great-grandson of Noah. But he is the son of Cush. And Cush is son of, I believe, Ham. I'm not looking right at it at the time. Perhaps only the principal nations of his time For though the list comprises the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all their descendants are not enumerated. In other words, there were more people in those families than we can see here. Those descendants, with one or two exceptions, are described by names indicative of tribes and nations, and ending in the Hebrew I-N, or the English Ite, I-T-E, like Hittite, Jacobite, all those different ites. Beginning in the 10th chapter, we looked at a lot of these, especially all of them in the first 5 verses. And so I just want to speak through some of the comments that are made by Dr. Guzik, David Guzik. And he says, the sons of Japheth, he was the father of the Indo-European peoples. Now that's the people who are in that large area of Western Europe and Asia. Those are the Indo-European peoples. Those stretching from India to Western Europe, so it covers quite an expanse. They're each linked by linguistic similarities that often seem invisible to the layman, but are much more obvious to the linguist. And so all of those nations, even though their languages are not the same language, the languages are derivative of one another. A single language became other languages as people moved, as times change, terms change, and so all of those languages, though they have a common beginning, probably cannot correspond with one another lingually. That is, speak to one another. Gomer, from this son of Japheth came the Germanic peoples, from whom came most of the original peoples of Western Europe. The French, the Spanish, the Celts, who later invaded Britain, and it became the Irish, well, a number of them did. Celts, the Nordic peoples, and some of the others. And they became the people then that settled in Wales and Scotland and Ireland and Great Britain. And so all of that is seen in the family of Japheth and in his descendants, Gomer. Japheth, through his son Gomer, I get it that right, and then another son, Magog, and then there are 2 other names in here, Tubal and Meshach, which I briefly touched upon last week. Magog is a great, big, northern European area that encompasses the Caucasus Mountains, where Russia and the descendants of Russia are found. In Ezekiel 38, in verse 1, it talks about Gog in the land of Magog, the chief prince of Rosh. All right, Gog is the name of a person. Magog is the geographical area. The prince of Rosh, then, is the prince of Russia. Now, you can chase this down in other resources, and you can find that even today, in Hebrew papers and in the Hebrew language, as well as some of the other Semitic languages, Rosh is still used to refer to Russia. So that one's pretty well nailed down. Tubal is to the east, Meshech to the west. You may have that backward. Meshech to the east and Tubal to the west. They are the eastern and western capitals of Rosh in the land of Magog, and their names today are Tobolsk and Moscow. Tobolsk is the capital of one side of Russia, and Moscow, Meshech, the other side of Russia, and became the primary seat of government for the whole Russian Empire, and then later on the Soviet Union. And then Nadab is the son of Japheth, and from him come the ancient Medes. You may have heard of the Medes and the Persians, and they populated what are now Iran and Iraq. The peoples of India also came from this branch of Japheth's family. Now Javan, from this son of Japheth came the ancient Greeks. Again, the Greeks didn't stay where they were, even in New Testament times, but were continually sending out people into other parts of the world in order to stabilize or in order to expand their influence as people, not as a government. And so we have some of the ancient Greeks moving into the area that is today Scotland and Wales. And so sometimes they competed with one another, sometimes they coexisted with one another, and it's just according to the time period that they ended up there. Then the sons of Gomer. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. Ashkenaz, from this son of Gomer came the peoples that settled in North Judea, or that which is now called the present. So that's Israel, probably all the way up through Lebanon, and all the way up into Syria, and those areas. Togarmah, from the son of Gomer came the Armenians, the sons of Javan, as we said, were the ancient Greeks. Then we get down to Ham. And with Ham, we have the descendants. Now remember, Ham is the one who told his brothers about his father being uncovered in his tent. And according to the phraseology in Hebrew grammar, the idea is that it was the son of Ham who did something despicable, and then it was Canaan and his descendants that were cursed. And these, then, how far did I get on Ham? All right, this is Africa and the Far East. They settled the lands of Africa and the Far East. I'll just move on from here. Canaan refers to the peoples who originally settled the land we today think of as Israel and its surrounding regions. The sons of Cush. We have Cush being born to Ham. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabekah. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begat our friend Nimrod, the world's first dictator. At least on our side of the flood. We don't know of anything on the other side of the flood. And Nimrod was an offense before the face of God. Now, he is called a great hunter in the face of God. It doesn't mean that he was a great hunter and blessed of God. It means he was a great hunter in the face of God. In other words, he was under God's observation continually. And he was under God's observation because of the fact that he did not accept the message that God wanted his people to have. He did not accept the command to go and to try to populate the whole earth. He wanted to gather all the people together in his presence, for them to look to him for strength and authority in all things, and forsake God in his worship. Now, this does not mean that he was a great hunter as one who goes out looking for mountain sheep and deer and antelope and anything else that may play on the prairie. He was a hunter of men, a warrior. And he would then intimidate people to be under his control. And that's how he built his kingdom that we're going to uncover a little bit more a little bit later. According to James Boyce, this is not talking about Nimrod's ability to hunt wild game. He was not a hunter of animals. He was a hunter of men, a warrior. It was through his ability to fight and kill and rule ruthlessly that this kingdom of the Euphrates Valley city-states were consolidated. And from those, his chief point then, the place where he settled down in, was Babel, much later known as Babylon. That is where we're going to cut it at this point. I know this is sometimes dry going through genealogies, but they're important. J. Vernon McGee said that he thought the genealogies were the driest, most boring part of the whole Bible. But it is from those genealogies that we learn so much about what transpired throughout not only the land of Israel, but throughout the world, and especially New Testament times. So they're important. The names are important. The meanings of the names are important. And so when you see those big lists of names, don't let your eyes roll back in the back of your head. But follow them through. And even if you only can follow through a few at a time, do that. Because they're important. Say it. It's yours.